Well, everyone, it is time for us to go ahead and talk about a beautiful console that came out it's about a year and a half now, which is the Nintendo Switch OLED model. This is probably going to be the last Nintendo Switch that ever came out, and it's very interesting because there are tons of different news and tidbits that have been coming about the next generation of Nintendo Switch consoles, but this one may be the final iteration. Now, if you want to pick up this console, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, with this Nintendo Switch OLED model, it did come out back in 2021, and the concept of this console was pretty clear. It was supposed to be a little bit of a bigger successor to the original Nintendo Switch, but it wasn't a actual successor. It was just a different model, an upgraded model with pretty much the same exact thing as the original Nintendo Switch, which isn't really a bad thing. Now, with the OLED model, you were getting a little bit of a bigger display, which was nice. You were getting an OLED display too, which was beautiful. This is a much better panel than the original Nintendo Switch, and if you're somebody who actually plans on playing your Nintendo Switch in a portable mode all the time, this OLED model has held up very, very well. Although I do use my OLED model as my primary portable Switch, I still haven't yet to see any screen burn-in or anything on this OLED model yet. I don't think I have crazy amounts of game time on this OLED Switch, since I do also use my original Switch docked up, but I do think that with this console, it has a pretty decent OLED display. I haven't seen too many people complain about this panel overall, and I think that's probably one thing to keep in mind. And in terms of the actual features of this OLED model on the front, no crazy things on the front, at least like I mentioned before. Again, exactly the same concept of the original Switch. On the bottom you had the USB-C port, charging port, which can also get docked up, which was really nice. And on the back, there really wasn't anything different here either. It pretty much gave you that same feeling, that same texture. You had the micro SD card slot on this console as well. So the same power button, volume buttons, everything, game cartridge on the top as well. You had the Joy-Con slot on the side where you can go ahead and, slide in your Joy-Cons and pretty much move on with your life. So there really wasn't anything with this console where I looked at and I was like, wow, this is a humongous update. But that panel in and of itself was a really big change. And I was really happy to actually have a, bigger screen at that moment. It's not necessarily the bigger console, but it has a bigger display because it has a little bit less bezel around it. So I think that was a really nice touch that Nintendo did here, and that in and of itself is really cool. However, like I mentioned, the feature set is kind of the same. With the original Switch, there's really not anything that this console can't do that the Nintendo Switch can do, or vice versa. The only thing that you kind of have an advantage to is that if you do get the Nintendo Switch OLED model, the version actually does have a Ethernet port that you can actually plug in. So on the dock itself, you can actually plug in an Ethernet port, which I think is actually really cool. And if you're wanting to go ahead and do gaming over, an Ethernet port rather than actually going through Wi-Fi, well, that gives you a wired connection, which a lot of modern, consoles actually have. Pretty much every console that's came out in the last few years has that type of, experience. So in this specific case, not anything super crazy either, but it's one of those things that's actually really, really nice. Now, the biggest piece of news that we've gotten, the biggest development last year that we got besides all the Nintendo updates and games that have came out, is actually pretty much with the successor of the whole entire Nintendo Switch. So it looks like Nintendo was actually trying to go ahead and make a pro model of the Nintendo Switch. So they were actually trying to go through and actually make a, Nintendo Switch Pro, which was supposed to be I don't even know what they were trying to do with that. I think it was supposed to be the super heavy gamer. It was supposed to be tailored to them, but it looks like they didn't choose to do that. So that gives me hope that the next Nintendo Switch is pretty much right around the corner. I feel like that's going to be here sooner than later, and I think that's probably something to keep in mind. With this Nintendo Switch OLED model, you are actually getting probably one of the last iterations of the Nintendo Switch in general. It's almost like buying a Game Boy Advance SP. It's almost like buying a maybe Nintendo Wii U kind of in a way. It's also almost like buying a PS Vita or Nintendo 3DS XL, the newer ones, or the 2DS XL. It's almost like the last iteration of those consoles. There's tons and tons of different consoles that have came out back in the day, but because this is the last iteration, this is probably the final chapter of the Nintendo Switch lineup. Now, I don't know if the next iteration of these consoles, the Nintendo Switch, whatever the successor is, I don't know if those ones are going to end up having the same support of games as this one does. I hope it does. If it doesn't, then that's going to be a massive L in my part for Nintendo. But with this OLED OLED model, kind of bringing it back to it, this has been a very good console in my opinion. Now, the only issue I've been having for the most part, at least with my Nintendo Switch OLED model, is that sometimes the fans will kick up. And this is a very annoying thing. And when I say sometimes, I mean every time I play any game, for the most part, whether I'm playing Super Smash Brothers, or I'm playing New Super Mario U Deluxe, or I'm playing whatever game I'm playing, it just seems like these games are not optimized for this console anymore. Even games that used to play fine like Super Mario Odyssey, it does actually show maybe a little bit more lag than it used to. Maybe on the OLED model not so much, but with my original Switch, I've been noticing that all of the time. Now, personally, I don't know why this is the case. You know, I mean, I know why this is the case, but games that used to run fine aren't running fine anymore. This could be because of software updates that have been coming out or something along those lines. But the thing to keep in mind with all three of these Nintendo Switch consoles is that they all have pretty much the same chipset inside of it. Now, why is that important? Well, the Nintendo Switch, that came out in 2017 has the same internals for the most part as the OLED Nintendo Switch. That chipset is very outdated as of this point. So even though game developers are still making games for this console, they have to find ways to kind of tune down the graphics and just make a game that is runnable on these consoles. And that's why I think for the most part, there's been a huge, I would say there's been a slowdown of games coming out for the Switch probably in the last year. And I think that's mostly to do with this, the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom coming out, but also with the next Nintendo Switch coming out, whatever that next model's name is going to be. I think a lot of people and a lot of developers are waiting out for that specific console so they can go ahead and, actually make a new game with a newer chipset. That way they don't have to depend on a super outdated version of that specific console. So I think that's probably the biggest disappointment with the OLED model. I feel like there could have been some improvements they could have made there. Again, I don't think it's like the end of the world or anything, but that was something that I've kind of noticed before, and I do kind of wish that, Nintendo kind of fixed that specific situation that was going on in that specific example. So I wish they made a faster console or something, but we all can pretty much dream. I don't really think that anything like that's going to happen anytime soon. So that kind of covers it up there. Now, in the same breath, I do want to talk about basically the whole entire experience of this console moving forward. So what I want to say is that if you currently own a Nintendo Switch, I think getting the OLED model, it doesn't really make a crazy amount of sense if you already own a Switch or a Switch Lite, especially if you play your Nintendo Switch in a docked mode. If you have the original Switch, if you play in a docked mode all the time, there's absolutely no reason to go for the OLED model unless you really want that Ethernet port. If you're specifically, if you're really in the portable mode, let's say you have the Switch Lite or even this original Switch, and you're always playing in portable mode, and let's say your Switch console is almost broken now, or it's not the same as it used to be, or you plan on keeping your Switch for the next 4 years anyway, even when the next console comes out, I would recommend going for the OLED model. I think it is a very, very good console. The last year, like I said, I haven't had any issues with it. The only thing is sometimes the games aren't really running that well anymore, which is kind of expected, but this is the one thing I would recommend you to do, is if you are in that situation, just go ahead and update your console. But if you are in the situation where, maybe you don't know, or maybe you don't know if you want to get it or not, I would recommend, if you currently own a Nintendo Switch, just keep those consoles, wait out another year, wait until the next Legend of Zelda comes out, and wait until more news comes out of the next Nintendo Switch console. I think that would probably be something I would recommend doing. But in my opinion, I think the OLED model is pretty much it. I think the OLED model is the last Nintendo Switch, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening in the future. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.